President Donald Trump's visit to South Korea. Live from Seoul, I'm Moon Kwon-young. Now, President Donald Trump wakes up to his second and final day in South Korea today, and all eyes are on will he or won't he? The U.S. president's spontaneous meet and greet with North Korea's Kim Jong-un, that is. And that all depends on whether the North Korean leader decides to show up at the DMZ, the border barrier that divides the South and North Korea, after Mr. Trump, of course, put out an offer to Kim on Twitter less than 48 hours ago. Now, Trump's DMZ visit is scheduled for later this afternoon following his bilateral summit with South Korean President Moon Jae-in, and you can be sure that we'll be here to bring you real-time coverage of all the events ahead. But now first on the billionaire real estate tycoon turned president's itinerary this Sunday morning is, yes, he's going to talk business with chiefs of South Korea's biggest conglomerates and other business leaders. So to help us through this portion of coverage today, I have in the studio with me Dr. Kim Se-won, professor of economics at Seoul-based Ewha Women's University. Professor Kim, it's a delight to have you here with us.
Pleasure to be here.
Right, so we'll be checking in with you and in and out throughout this coverage. But first, I want to get to the Moon-Trump summit that is scheduled at the top office later today, with many wanting to know if there will be more summit meetings involving the North Korean leader. Now, for more on the latest and the general atmosphere, we go live to our presidential office correspondent standing by at the Blue Office for us. Semin, we still don't know if there will be a summit with Kim Jong-un. Now, has there been any developments on that front yet?
Not much. The latest we heard from the presidential office was late last night when the chief secretary for presidential office, Yoon Do-han, came down to talk to reporters about the outcomes and what had happened during the meeting, a dinner meeting that is, between the two leaders, Moon and Trump. He said that the two leaders had a mutual understanding that meeting with North Korea's Kim Jong-un would be a good thing, but still no mention asked for yes or no for a summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un today. This is him last night.
There is no final confirmation of a meeting with Chairman Kim Jong-un tomorrow, but if a meeting does take place, it will be a critical chance to initiate a new momentum for dialogue.
Although nothing has been confirmed, the presidential office said it is gearing for all possibilities. Now, that would mean potential Kim-Trump summit, just as Trump had initiated on Twitter yesterday, or a Moon-Kim-Trump summit, a three-way meeting with all three parties at the demilitarized zone dividing the two Koreas. So given the circumstances, there is also a possibility that President Moon of South Korea may join his American counterpart to the DMZ following their summit meeting this morning. So we may be able to see the two leaders, both Moon and Trump, strolling the heavily fortified border of the DMZ between the two Koreas, just something that they had attempted to do so 2 years ago when President Trump was visiting Seoul on a state visit. Kanya?
Right. I remember that incident. Now, Trump really wanted to go there to DMZ, but weather would not allow it this time, maybe. We'll have to see. Now, besides the North Korea factor summit, there is a scheduled summit meeting between the leaders of South Korea and the U.S. at the top office later today. We saw in President Trump's Twitter this morning that he had a wonderful meeting with President Moon last night during their dinner banquet. Now, give us a picture of how today might fold out.
Right. The general outline of President Trump's schedule today here in Seoul is that his first official schedule that is known to reporters will begin at around 10 a.m. this morning, a little less than 30 minutes from now. And that will be, just as you said, with a meeting with Korean business leaders in one of the hotels in Seoul. And following that, at around 11 a.m. will be a summit meeting between Presidents Moon and Trump, their eighth such kind since taking office, and their first in 80 days after their last encounter in Washington in April. Now, after that is a joint press conference. Now, that's when many are hoping that the reporters here will be able to learn if there will be a summit with North Korea's Kim Jong-un or not. So a lot of big unknowns today at this point, but the biggest question may be, many are wanting to know whether North Korea will answer with a surprise appearance today. And given Trump's impulsiveness and North Korean leaders' unpredictability, we just need to keep an eye on what's about to happen throughout the day. Kanyang?
Absolutely. Our Shin Se-min from the nation's top office, the Blue House, will check back with her throughout the day. Now, like our Se-min said, in about 20 minutes or so at 10 a.m. in Seoul, U.S. President Donald Trump has his rendezvous with Korean business leaders. We want to go live now to our business correspondent, Kim Hae-sung. She's standing by the Grand Hyatt in downtown Seoul, which is the venue of that very rendezvous. Now, Hae-sung, describe to us what the atmosphere is like over there. I would imagine the security is extra tight, and so far we know that Samsung Electronics Lee Jae-yong, Hyundai Motor Group Chung Ri-sun, SK Group Choi Tae-won, Lotte Group Shin Dong-bin, and the VP of LG Group will be there, among others. Now, has any of them been spotted there just yet?
Exactly. I was here since 6 a.m. this morning. I saw them going and entering the hotel. The Hyatt is where President Trump stayed overnight. It's where most U.S. presidents have stayed during their visits to South Korea because it's located in Namsan, surrounded by mountains. There aren't many tall buildings around, so it's relatively safe. And security in and around the hotel, as you said, is super tight. You can see many buses and police around the area. And now going to the meeting between President Trump and South Korean business leaders, it's significant in that it's the first such meeting with President Trump. There are business leaders from a dozen Korean companies, like you said, those from Samsung Electronics, SK Group, Hyundai Motor Company, and LG Electronics. When Trump visited Korea back in November 2017, he had a banquet dinner with these business leaders along with President Moon Jae-in, but not a direct meeting with corporate executives, so it is first meeting between President Trump and the business leaders.
Hae-sung, the chiefs of those very 5 conglomerates we saw get together just a few days ago, if I remember correctly, for a late-night meeting with Saudi Arabia's MBS. Now, what are likely to top their agenda today with the U.S. president?
So, Kanyang, the meeting was organized by the U.S. Embassy to South Korea and AmCham, the American Chamber of Commerce in Korea. The AmCham and the U.S. Embassy and the White House reportedly asked these Korean companies for their investment data in the U.S. So companies present at the meeting, Kanyang, are those that have invested a lot in the U.S. or companies that have future investment plans. So President Trump is likely to call on these companies to invest more in the U.S., just as he had done during his meeting with Japanese business executives in Tokyo last month. Now, Samsung Electronics has a semiconductor factory in the U.S., in Texas, SK, a battery factory in Georgia, and Lotte Chemical has a plant in Louisiana. So Trump, especially as his re-election campaign is underway, is likely to ask them for more investment into the U.S. But there won't be much on pressuring Korean companies to cut trade with Chinese tech firm Huawei, which had been somewhat of a concern for Korean businesses. Following trade talks with President Xi Jinping in Osaka yesterday, President Trump softened his tone on the Chinese tech firm, saying U.S. companies can supply parts to Huawei if it doesn't pose a risk to national security. So it is a relief for the South Korean chip makers. And another issue that could be on the agenda is auto tariffs, especially it could be raised by Hyundai Motor Company, who would demand an exemption to Trump's auto tariffs on Korean cars. The U.S. has been conducting an investigation under Section 232 on national security grounds, looking to possibly imposing tariffs on foreign car imports this coming November. In fact, USTR officials are known to have visited South Korea 2 weeks ago to conduct research on Korean auto industry. So now, Kanyang, the topics on the agenda are increasing investment into the U.S. and possibly exemption to auto tariffs for Korean companies. That's what I have for now, and I'll have more updates on our later newscast. Back to you, Kanyang.
All right, our Kim Hae-sung nearby the venue of the business leaders meeting with the visiting U.S. president. Many thanks, Hae-sung. We'll check back with you for more updates. Now, I want to talk to Professor Kim about what could actually be on the agenda for the U.S. president and these business leaders. But what I can imagine off the top of my head right now is, like our Kim Hae-sung said, Trump's call to these businesses to expand their investments in the United States, quite possibly, urging their participation in joining the anti-Huawei movement in China, but that, of course, perhaps less likely since Presidents Trump and Xi held a meeting in Osaka and where they decided to resume their negotiations. Now, but before we delve into the industries, I want to touch upon the bigger bilateral relations between these two economies. No, I don't know if you've seen, but the early riser that Trump is, and of course a Twitter fan, he took to Twitter this morning and said that with the South Korean President Moon Jae-in last night at their dinner banquet, they toasted a new trade deal, which in his words are far better than the previous one, obviously from the United States' point of view. We presume he's referring to the South Korea-U.S. FTA. Of course, the details of this revised deal has not been made public yet, but what kind of changes are we expecting, or do we expect from this revised deal?
Well, after revised FTA between U.S. and Korea, the trade partnership between U.S. and Korea has been really intensified. For example, South Korea's trade surplus against the United States was like $27 billion 2 years ago, but that has been decreased down to $17 billion as of last year. So South Korea's trade surplus against the United States is quickly declining, which is a good news to Mr. Trump administration. At the same time, U.S. Service export to South Korea is increasing quickly, which is strongest industry of the United States, up to $12 billion as of last year. So I believe that revised FTA between the two countries has a big contribution on intensified economic relation between the two countries.
Now, with regards to this pact, what are some observation points, key observation points that we should be on the lookout for or that require extra attention?
Well, Mr. Trump, as we know, is a super protection trade policy believer. So he, all the time, when he meets Korean government people and Korean business leaders, he really emphasizes the fair trade between the two countries. And he wants to really encourage Korean big corporations' direct investment in U.S. territory, like memory chip plants or automobile assembly lines. So he will do the same at this time when over his visit to Korea.
Right. I want to come back to you, Professor Kim, for more fine prints on what the president must have discussed with these business leaders, as well as that bilateral trade pact. And I will be back with you in just a little bit. But for now, I want to get back to the U.S. President Donald Trump's offer to North Korea about a flash meeting at the DMZ with North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Now, apparently, officials of the U.S. and North Korea are working on an arrangement there. And this comes after Trump tweeted yesterday that he would be okay with meeting the North Korean leader, even if it's just for a handshake and a hello. Our Park Hee-jun has more on this story.
U.S. President Donald Trump has suggested that his proposal on Twitter of a meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un just might happen, raising hopes of a third summit, this time at the demilitarized zone.
Have you heard anything from North Korea today?
Thank you. We have, yes. It's going to be very interesting.
After the G20 summit in Osaka, President Trump flew straight to Seoul for his summit with President Moon, which started with a dinner banquet on Saturday at the Blue House. Hours earlier, Trump had tweeted that he wouldn't mind a handshake and a hello with the North Korean leader at the border separating the two Koreas. President Moon said a meeting like that would be great, but either way, the proposal itself has great significance.
트윗 하나로 전 세계를 지원드렸습니다. 트윗의 내용대로 성사가 된다면 그야말로 역사적인 사건이 될 것이고 또 성사되지 않는다 하더라도 트럼프 대통령께서 김정은 위원장에게 굉장한 성의를 보인 것이기 때문에 그 자체로서 이미 큰 성과를 거뒀다고 생각합니다.
The Blue House says there's been no final decision yet, but if it happens, it would be a good chance for a positive turn in the nuclear negotiations. And according to a senior official, the top office is open to the possibility of both a bilateral meeting between North Korea and the U.S. and a trilateral one, including South Korea. He said it will be confirmed before Trump leaves for his trip to the DMZ. If North Korea says yes to a meeting, it will be the first since the one 4 months ago in Hanoi, where they failed to reach an agreement on the North denuclearization. Park Hee-jun, Arirang News.
Well, so the entire world is up high with speculation on whether they'll meet or not. And at such a point, it's important to note who were in attendance where and who weren't. Now, two key U.S. officials in charge of North Korea's nuclear issue had been scheduled to attend the dinner banquet with President Moon last night, but they were absent. Now, it turned out they left their hotel in Seoul at around 4 in the afternoon yesterday and returned back at 10. Could they have talked to their northern counterparts to arrange this so-called handshake meeting? Our Oh Jung-hee takes it apart.
Key U.S. officials in charge of the North Korea nuclear issue, Stephen Biegun and Alison Hooker, did not take part in the dinner banquet held by Seoul's presidential office on Saturday to welcome President Trump. And this raises a question. Did Biegun and Hooker have an encounter with North Korean officials to arrange a possible handshake meeting between Kim Jong-un and Donald Trump at the inter-Korean border? U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun reportedly left his hotel in Seoul at around 4 in the afternoon. He came back 6 hours later at 10 p.m. with Alison Hooker, the Korea director at the U.S. National Security Council. The two were originally scheduled to attend the dinner banquet at Cheongwadae but didn't appear at the banquet. When asked whether he talked with North Korean officials, Biegun didn't provide details but only said he won't take any questions. When leaving his hotel earlier in the day, he'd been asked a similar question, to which he responded, he's very busy. Reports arose that working-level officials from Pyongyang and Washington were communicating on Saturday to arrange Kim and Trump's surprise encounter at the demilitarized zone. The channel, a direct hotline between the UN command and the North Korean military. Biegun and Hooker's 6 hours absence, therefore, led to views that they could have been involved in the communication work. Nothing is for certain. And South Korea's presidential office declined to comment on the matter, saying Seoul is not aware of why the two U.S. officials had to be absent. But if the two were indeed working to settle protocols and other issues with the North, it's likely such work would continue on Sunday as well, because the 6 hours on Saturday would not have been long enough. Oh Jung-hee, Arirang News.
Now, President Donald Trump and his daughter Ivanka Trump were at the Blue House for the Saturday night welcoming dinner. Upon arrival, they had a special meeting with some of the stars of Kpop and, yes, LPGA star golfer, just for Donald Trump, perhaps. Our Won Jung-hwan reports on that meeting.
Some special guests greeted the U.S. president when he arrived at the Sangchungje pavilion for the welcoming banquet. Park Se-ri, head coach of South Korea's female golf team for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, and South Korean boy band EXO greeted Trump's family. The presence of Park, a retired star golfer, seemed quite obvious, considering President Trump's love of the sport. Trump spoke at length with the iconic figure of South Korean golf, saying at one point that she's gonna be my partner. Some 2 years ago, Trump highlighted the success of the country's female golfers in his speech to the Korean parliament. And the Park is known to be the very first success story.
박성현 선수를 비롯해서 지금 LPGA에서 활약하고 있는 한국 여성 골퍼들이 모두 우리 박세리 선수의 성공을 보고 그 꿈을 따라서 한 이른바 박세리 퀴즈입니다.
Also in the spotlight was the relationship between famous Korean idol group EXO and Trump's daughter. During the meeting, President Moon told Ivanka he had invited EXO on her behalf since her daughter is known to be a huge fan of the K-pop group and her birthday was coming up in July. In fact, the relationship between the two goes all the way back to last year's Pyeongchang Winter Olympics when EXO met with Ivanka during the closing ceremony. And when the members of EXO presented Ivanka with a signed copy of their 5th studio album, Love Shot, she asked when is their next US tour and even followed the K-pop group's official account through SNS, confirming that she has been their fan ever since the Pyeongchang Olympics. While most of the focus this weekend will be on politics, the power of Korean culture and sports is also playing its part in strengthening diplomatic ties. 원정환, 아리랑 뉴스.
Well, all eyes are still on the possible meeting between the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. this Saturday or Sunday, actually, after President Trump said that he wants to meet Chairman Kim Jong-un at the DMZ. Although Trump told reporters that the offer was spontaneous, American news outlets are suggesting that it was planned in advance. Our Ko Ryun-hee reports.
When asked about his offer to meet Kim at the inter-Korean border on Saturday, President Trump said, quote, "I just thought of it this morning." However, according to American political newspaper The Hill, it seems like the suggestion was planned from at least a week ago. In an exclusive interview with The Hill on Monday, Trump said the DMZ would be one of the places he will be visiting. And when asked if he would meet the North Korean leader if Kim offered to do so, Trump said he might. The news outlet reported that it postponed publishing the news because of the request from the White House, which mentioned security issues in publicizing the plan in advance. Although The Hill's question included the presumption of Kim Jong-un offering to meet Trump at the DMZ, this signals that the U.S. president has been picturing the surprise occasion even before he left for the G20 summit in Osaka. This is different from President Trump's answer to reporters right before departing for the summit in Japan, saying that he will be meeting with a lot of other people but not Chairman Kim Jong-un, although he may be speaking to Kim in a different form. Analysts say President Trump tried to maximize the dramatic effect of the event by taking the form of an impromptu proposal in public, while preparing for the meetup in advance under tight security. And U.S. Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun's arrival in Seoul on Thursday adds weight to the speculation that the meeting was planned ahead of time. The Washington Post also reported on Saturday that the rumors that the White House was trying to organize a potential meeting had circulated for days in Washington and Seoul. If the leaders do meet on Sunday, it will be their third meeting. And some are expecting that the first trilateral meeting of the leaders of the two Koreas and the U.S. might happen as well. Ko Ryun-hee, Arirang News.
Now let's delve into whether this meeting will happen, its implications, ramifications, pros and cons. We have live via Skype Scott Schneider, senior researcher at the Council on Foreign Relations and one of Korea's go-to experts. Scott, thanks so much for linking up with us.
Sure, glad to be here.
So there had been talks about this flash meeting in recent weeks and days, but President Trump just offered to meet with Kim Jong-un on Twitter while he was in Osaka in the last 2 days. Now, I want to get direct to this question. Do you think this meeting between Trump and Kim will happen later this afternoon, and what would that signify? What does that mean?
Well, I think there's an increasing likelihood that the meeting will occur later this afternoon. It's pretty clear, I think, in retrospect, that this is something that the United States has been working on with North Korea and with South Korea's knowledge and assistance. But here's the dilemma. 2 minutes, short meeting and a handshake is a photo op. A very distinctive one, but it doesn't necessarily deliver by itself any progress to build on Singapore or to solve the problems in Hanoi. And so that means that for the meeting to be really significant, there has to be a process that comes out of it through which we have working level talks and plans to actually close the gap between the two sides as a means by which to move forward on denuclearization and peace and the other issues that are on the U.S.-North Korea agenda. That's what's been missing ever since the Singapore summit. It's what did not materialize that needed to materialize in Hanoi. And now we're seeing once again an opportunity to do it, but we don't really have very much assurance yet that it'll actually happen.
No, Scott, like you said, there had been criticism that there had been a lack of working level preparatory talks before this leaders summit, and that is the reason behind the lack of substance from the Singapore summit and perhaps a failure from the Hanoi summit. Yet they're going in for, if they do, they're going in for a handshake, a photo op, like you said. what could possibly come out of that? I mean, what's in it for the U.S. and what's in it for North Korea to agree to this photo op opportunity along the DMZ for, according to Trump's words, for about 2 minutes?
Okay, so the key to understanding that, I think, is to understand that for President Trump, the relationship with Kim Jong-un, he sees him as a foil rather than as a foe. And what I mean by that is that in many respects, Kim Jong-un is the archetypal villain from his World Wrestling Federation days applied to international relations. And so what he's doing is trying to keep interest in the relationship. But the problem is that if the narrative is all about the relationship between Trump and Kim, it doesn't allow us to get at the substance. And so that's really the key problem, I think, on the U.S. side, is that Trump can use the relationship for political purposes in order to keep people interested. But unless we actually make progress in narrowing the gap between the two sides, it's not going to yield anything. And on the North Korean side, for Kim Jong-un, I think he's voluntarily playing the role of foil because he's being normalized through this process. He's getting prestige benefits. He is able to interact with Trump and has had residual benefits in terms of all sorts of summits with other leaders. And so this is really a beneficial thing for Kim Jong-un. I think that at Panmunjom, the only difference is that when we saw Kim meet with Moon at the DMZ, it was almost as though Kim Jong-un was going from being a god to human. And so to the extent that Kim Jong-un is also humanized in the eyes of his own people, there's a little bit of a risk, but I'm sure the North Koreans think it's entirely manageable.
Well, if I remember correctly, leading up to the Moon-Kim summit and the Panmunjom rendezvous, just hours and hours of preparatory work went into that to build the infrastructure for those two leaders to meet, and it was choreographed to the teeth. Now, I can't imagine how this could be all put together in just a matter of hours' time, but we'll have to see whether that happens. Now, left out in this, it seems like from the viewer's point, is South Korea's President Moon Jae-in. Now, if we remember correctly, President Moon was the one who, in fact, built the bridge between Trump and Kim to meet. And it seems that North Korean Kim Jong-un is less appreciative of President Moon, but very favorable towards President Trump. Just this morning, North Korea's one of those propaganda media sites lashed out at South Korea and basically told the South to stay out of this. What is the message there? What's North Korea doing? Why is North Korea doing what it's doing to South Korea and keeping U.S. on its side?
Yeah, that's a very interesting development. And frankly, I think that in a way, it's a mistake for the North Koreans to do that. But I think they're so focused on Trump. And actually, we've seen Moon be a little bit forward-leaning in his public statements, for instance, on his trip to Scandinavia, where he almost seemed prepared to divulge, that there were hidden contents from the exchange of letters. And I think that rubbed the North Koreans the wrong way. Moon benefits from standing next to Trump and Kim if this happens. But it's absolutely true that the North Koreans, by meeting with Xi, by not meeting with Moon, by issuing statements criticizing Moon and South Korea's stance on these issues, I mean, they're really playing the Our Nation Together, Uri Minjokiri card pretty strongly in ways that are intended to marginalize South Korea and to put Trump and Kim together in the spotlight.
Well, we'll have to wait and see whether that meeting actually does materialize later this afternoon. Scott Schneider, senior researcher at Council on Foreign Relations, many thanks to you for linking up with us. We appreciate your insights as always.
Thank you so much.
Now, President Trump's planned visit to the demilitarized zone today will make him the 5th U.S. president to do so. Our Kan Hyung-woo takes us through the history of American presidents visiting the DMZ and the significance of those trips.
In November 1983, Ronald Reagan made a trip to observation post Olet just south of the military demarcation line separating the two Koreas. He looked at the north through binoculars, becoming the first sitting U.S. president to travel to the DMZ. In a speech to American troops at Camp Liberty Bell, Reagan said, "They stand between the free world and the armed forces of a system that is hostile to everything Americans believe in, calling them the front lines of freedom." Bill Clinton's trip to the DMZ in July 1993 came when tensions were high between Pyongyang and Washington, with North Korea leaving the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty 4 months earlier. Clinton even visited the Bridge of No Return that crosses the military demarcation line in the Joint Security Area. His warning message to Pyongyang was loud and clear. If North Korea develops nuclear weapons, the regime will be erased from the earth. 9 years later, George W. Bush visited the DMZ in February 2002, a month after he named the North as a part of an axis of evil during his State of the Union address. But Bush toned down his words after his visit to the DMZ. At a joint press conference with South Korea's then-President Kim Dae-jung, Bush said he was deeply concerned about a country that is not transparent, allows its people to starve, and develops weapons of mass destruction. He added that both Seoul and Washington have no intention of attacking Pyongyang. When Barack Obama paid a visit to the DMZ in March 2012, he told U.S. troops that the contrast between South and North Korea could not be starker, saying that the differences in prosperity and freedom between the two Koreas were striking. Also referring to Pyongyang's announcement of its intention to conduct a missile launch after it had agreed to suspend long-range missile launches in exchange for food aid from Washington, Obama warned that North Korea will achieve nothing by threats or provocations, and the missile launch would make it even more isolated than it already is. 강영우, Arirang News.
The DMZ in the only divided country in the world. Let's take a look at the demilitarized zone in a more focused lens. Following a dramatic turn of events in 2018, the DMZ, one of the world's most heavily guarded borders and a symbol of division and conflict, is now becoming a symbol of peace. Our Kim Min-ji has the details on the DMZ.
The demilitarized zone has divided South and North Korea since hostilities ceased in the Korean War following the signing of an armistice in 1953. Running roughly 240 kilometers across the Korean peninsula, the DMZ is a buffer zone 2 kilometers wide on either side of the military demarcation line, where military activity is forbidden. Located within the DMZ is a truce village of Panmunjom. Over the years, the border village has seen an influx of visitors at times, while completely idle at others, all depending on the situation on the peninsula. On April 27, 2018, a new chapter in Panmunjom's and the nation's history was written. Panmunjom was the site of the historic summit between South Korean President Moon Jae-in and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The leaders met at the military demarcation line that cuts across the village and even crossed over to each side, vowing to turn the DMZ into what they called a peace zone. 2 more summits followed in its wake, gradually transforming one of the world's most heavily fortified borders into a symbol of peace, rather than a symbol of conflict and division. The two Koreas inked a military agreement that removed landmines on guard posts within the area, as well as arms and ammunition. 35 soldiers from each side still stand guard, but they're unarmed. Seoul also reopened the joint security area on the southern side to the public in May. With U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to the DMZ, anticipation is running high that it could reignite nuclear talks that have seemingly stalled since the Hanoi summit in February and take the Korean peninsula another step closer to peace. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Now, over the weekend, South Korean activist groups held rallies to either welcome or protest against President Trump while he was heading to his hotel in downtown Seoul. Our Choi Si-young takes a closer look at these groups.
After Saturday's dinner hosted by South Korean President Moon Jae-in, President Trump headed to the Grand Hyatt Hotel in downtown Seoul to spend the night before the summit with Moon on Sunday. South Korea's conservative groups held banners and shouted "We love Trump" or "We love USA," waving an American flag. Protesters were also out with banners. Earlier, South Korean police issued a high visual alert and roads and streets near the hotel were temporarily shut down. Presidents Moon and Trump are scheduled to hold a bilateral summit on Sunday afternoon. 최시영, Arirang News.
As we mentioned at the top of this special program this morning, President Trump tweeted that his trip to the DMZ had been planned for a long time. Now, all eyes are on whether he will actually meet Kim Jong-un there. Our Yoon Jung-min has this and more details from his tweet this morning.
In his latest tweet, President Trump says his trip to the DMZ was planned long ago. The trip later today will be closely watched to see whether North Korean leader Kim Jong-un appears and whether there is a historic three-way meeting with South Korean President Moon Jae-in, who is expected to be going with Trump to the DMZ. Earlier, Trump tweeted that he might see Kim at the border to say hello. He also said to reporters at the Blue House that he'd got some kind of response from the North but didn't say what. Some say there might not be enough time, though, for the North to prepare for a meeting. As for his meeting with President Moon, Trump tweeted this morning that it went well and that he and President Moon toasted the new South Korea-U.S. free trade deal that took effect in January. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Now, we want to get back to the business leaders meeting between U.S. President Trump and the chiefs of South Korea's biggest conglomerates. We want to discuss this with our Professor Kim Se-won of Ewha Women's University. Now, Professor Kim, I think among those chiefs attending this business leaders meeting with Trump, Lotte Group Chairman Shin Dong-min is probably one of the only one who actually sat down for a face-to-face recently with President Trump at the White House. Of course, that was upon Trump's invitation, and he wanted to express his eager appreciation for a $3.1 billion investment in ethanol or ethane complex in Louisiana. That seems pretty huge to me. Now, what more could possibly Trump could possibly ask for to this business leaders?
Well, Mr. Trump is really want to have more foreign direct investment from Korean huge companies. Good candidates for that is Samsung Electronics expansion of memory chip plants in Texas, and LG Electronics expansion of their production facilities in battery in U.S. territory. So Mr. Trump is really specific in having more foreign direct investment with specific businessmen. So he actually did the same with Japanese business leaders a month ago over his official visit to Japan. He saw quite a few Japanese business leaders to have more investment from them. He specified Toyota, Nissan, and other huge companies to have more direct investment in U.S. I believe he's doing the same this time.
Now, U.S. President Trump, of course, the businessman in him, I'm sure, makes him really the CEO of the United States of America almost.
Right.
And he's been in talks with China's Xi over this U.S.-China trade spat that had been ongoing, which, of course, under the surface of that is the question of cybersecurity as well, about 5G and almost a dispute of hegemony in terms of setting the standard, the global standard for 5G and high tech. What do you think was ironed out between the two leaders at Osaka, and how could that spill over as an effect to the South Korean economy and its relations to the U.S.?
Well, actually, at a G20 meeting at Osaka, the two leaders decided not to expand the trade war between the two countries. I believe that is, as of now, something optimal solution and decision, considering their economic and political situation on the brinks in two countries. But I have to say that the trade negotiation is not over yet. It is delayed. So there will be a long conversation and discussion between the two countries on trade. So Korea is really involved in that trade negotiation because China and U.S. are the two largest trading partners of South Korea. So that means overall we will be seeing lots of seesaw games between the two countries in trade negotiations. So the result could be in Korea the more ups and downs of the export and GDP, of course, and exchange rates and stock prices.
Now, during his summit talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping in Osaka, President Moon said that he would not like to be put in the situation where South Korea needs to choose between U.S. or China because they are two of the biggest trade partners of South Korea. So does this give South Korea a little bit of a breathing room?
Well, the President Moon's speech on that situation on Korean kind of sandwich the situation between United States and China represents a very difficult situation Korean private firms today. I believe that regarding that pressure from U.S. and China, South Korean government should have given something guidelines and directions for Korean corporations. This is not a matter that a single firm, even though that is a huge, can handle because of this is something big pressure from the country level. So I believe that on that matter, Korean government and business should have more discussion and talks for appropriate solution on that problem.
Now, I want to talk about Huawei a little bit. So President Trump said that he basically softened his tone against Huawei and said that American firms would be able to sell their products to Huawei, but not the other way around for security reasons. What does that mean in layman's language?
At G20 Osaka meeting, Mr. Trump gave a hint that there is a possibility that lifting up bans on Huawei, but it doesn't mean that he's going to get rid of the restriction on Huawei 100%. So that could be interpreted different ways over different countries' corporations, but Huawei is still maintaining their business under U.S. government's restriction on the company. But if Korean companies like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix are not providing very important parts like memory chips to Huawei, they can't manage their business at all. So in that respect, again, the South Korean government has to have an appropriate and optimal solution under the pressure between the two countries.
Now, Huawei, of course, this trade spat and this dispute over Huawei isn't something that's going to go away soon. I mean, in fact, rather, it's something that will linger for a long, long time. In fact, setting the global standard, like I said, in the 5G technology, which is going to be absolutely vital in the way we live. How are, for instance, Samsung or other, I suppose, electronics companies and other firms how are they going to deal with this situation in the longer run?
Well, Huawei is, as we know, restricted by U.S. government, but at the same time, Huawei is one of the largest clients of Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix. And we know that the chip export is #1 export item of South Korea. So as a demander of the Korean export, Huawei and other electric corporations of China are extremely important. And so in that respect, we have to maintain a certain level of business relation with Chinese corporation, even with the pressure from United States government. Huawei's issue is not a simple trade conflict between U.S. and China. I believe it is a collision of two different systems. So there is a possibility that Huawei issue will be lasting for a longer time.
Absolutely. Now, last but not least, wrapping up, do you think that this revised deal between South Korea and the U.S. that we do not know of the details just yet, do you think that will affect South Korean economy's relations with Chinese economy?
Well, that really depends on the details of the revised agreement between U.S. and Korea. But U.S. government can't press South Korean government and South Korean corporations to have less economic relation with China. That is because that is against philosophy of the market economy. But instead, they can push South Korean corporations to have less supply of the basic electronics and technologies to Chinese corporations. I think that's what U.S. government can push South Korean economy and corporations.
Absolutely. Well, Professor Kim, thank you so much for staying with us throughout this program. We appreciate your insights, and yeah, we'll have you here in the studio again, hopefully.
Thank you very much.
So that was Professor Kim Se-won of Ewha Women's University. Now, that is a wrap for us for now and for this special coverage of U.S. President Donald Trump's visit to South Korea, his upcoming South Korea-U.S. summit talks, his joint press conference, and the ultimate visit to the DMZ and a possible meeting with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. We are going to be bringing you real-time live coverages all those events, but for now, we're going to go away for a little bit, but I'll be back soon. Take care.